Welcome to the Harmony Christian Church podcast. We hope you are encouraged by today's message from Pastor Josh Shoemaker.
John chapter 2, starting in verse 1, it says this. It says, "The next day they were at a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, 'They have no more wine.' 'Dear woman, that's not our problem.'" Those aren't the words you want to hear Jesus say, right? "Dear woman, that's not our problem," Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." But his mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Moms can do that, right? "Mom, it's not my time." And mom says, "You better believe it's your time if I say it's your time." Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold about 20 or 30 gallons. That's a lot of wine that's about to happen. Jesus told the servants, "Fill the jars with water." When the jars had been filled, he said, Now dip some out and take it to the master of the ceremonies." So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. "A host always serves the best wine first," he said. "Then when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now." This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother and his brothers and his disciples. Let's jump back up now to verse 4. Jesus is at this wedding, been invited to this wedding. His mother has been invited. This kind of tells us that this is probably a relative of Mary's, whether it's on Joseph's side or Mary's side, we don't know. But they're invited to this wedding, and they get to the wedding. Now listen, a wedding in ancient Jewish history, ancient Jewish time, during Jesus' time, a wedding wasn't a couple-hour event, right? Most of us kind of maybe have heard this before. It's not just a couple-hour event. The event doesn't even last for a day or 2 days. Oftentimes, this event lasts for 7 days. 7 days. Now, that's a party. The Hebrews knew how to throw a party, right? Can you imagine going to your boss, "Hey, I need to get off work for my cousin's wedding. I need about 7 days off." Is that gonna be okay? No, probably not, right? But they took 7 days to celebrate. All right? And so when they celebrated, they would have feasts every day. They would have, obviously, wine to celebrate every day. Every day was a party to celebrate the union between these two couples. Then halfway through the celebration, they run out of wine. Now listen, this isn't like running out of pizza, right? It's not like the other day when we had the Harmony House work day, we ordered pizza for everybody, or I ordered pizza for everybody, and Amber wasn't there to tell me how much pizza to order. So I was a little nervous I was going to order not enough pizza, okay? Now don't worry, we had plenty, okay? Everyone got enough, so it worked out. But this isn't like that, right? This isn't just, "Oh, we ran out of wine. Darn, we just need to run to the store, and whatever, pick up some more." It doesn't work like that. Running out of wine in this culture was a big deal. Let me explain just a little bit why it was a big deal. In this culture, the Hebrew, ancient Mediterranean Hebrew culture was a honor-shame culture, right? Your family was either an honorable family in the community or your family was shamed in the community based off of your social behavior, okay? So at a wedding, the wedding celebration wasn't just a celebration of their matrimony, it was also a test for the bridegroom. The test was, can this person host people well? Can this person bring honor to his family? Is this person responsible enough to plan and organize and honor his guests that are coming to his wedding? That it was actually the bridegroom, the groom's responsibility to make all of the preparations for this entire celebration and this wedding celebration, right? If you'll notice in the scripture, when the master of ceremonies tastes the wine, who does he call over? He calls the bridegroom over, right? And says, why have you saved the best for last, right? The reason he calls the bridegroom over was because it was his responsibility to make preparations for the whole ceremony. So to run out of wine in the middle of the ceremony was a sign that you were not responsible enough to have a family, that you couldn't live up to your obligations to host other people well. Does that make sense? So this wasn't, they just ran out of pizza and needed to get more pizza, right? This was a dishonor, showed dishonor to the bridegroom, and not just the bridegroom, but also the extended family of the bridegroom, his mom and dad, his grandparents. It was a whole family ordeal, right? No pressure, by the way, right? Don't mess up. But here's the deal. He did mess up. The bridegroom did not order enough wine to supply for his guests for the whole ceremony. The bridegroom actually failed. And sometimes I think we miss that in this story because the story ends well. But the reality is the bridegroom actually failed in his responsibility as the host of the party. Can you imagine with me what's happening in this moment? They're halfway through the celebration. They run out of wine. The servants are the first to realize it. You can begin to see the panic in their eyes, right? They're trying to hide it from the guests. They're trying to hide it from the bridegroom and his family. But the servant looks. They see they're out of wine. Word begins to spread among all of the servants. They're frantically trying to figure out what to do, right? They don't know what to do. And one of them says, you know what? Mary's pretty smart. Let's ask her. So they quietly go over to Mary, right? Mary, we've run out of wine. What do we do, right? Mary knows exactly what to do. She says, do whatever he, Jesus, tells you to do. And all of a sudden, all of these servants who are looking for a solution, who are frantically trying to figure out what to do, what happens in that moment when she says, look at him? All of their eyes turn to Jesus. All of their eyes turn to Jesus. It comes off of the problem, and they focus their attention instead to Jesus. What is Mary doing in this moment? She is pulling their eyes away from the problem and telling them to place it on the person of Jesus. When the problem came, she doesn't make the problem. This is so important. When the problem came, Mary doesn't continue to allow the problem to be the center of attention. She makes Jesus the center of attention. Notice she doesn't offer an actual solution. She just says, listen to him. Here's the point I'm trying to make this morning. The point is this: don't fall into the trap of making your problem the center of your attention. Don't fall into the trap of making your mistake and your issue the center of your attention. In the midst of the issues, in the midst of the problem, in the midst of the trouble, turn your attention away from that thing and place it on Jesus. Listen to him. Listen to him. He has the solution to your issue. Stop frantically running everywhere trying to figure out how to solve your problems. Get your eyes off of your problems and put them on the person of Jesus. Where are you at this morning? What issues are you dealing with? What is causing anxiety to fill your heart? What are you frantically running around trying to figure out how to do this morning? My encouragement to you is this: get your eyes off of that thing. Stop running around and put them on Jesus. He is the solution to every problem. He is the solution to every problem. And listen, watch what happens when you do. Watch how anxiety begins to melt away. Watch how peace, like a river, begins to flood your spirit when you get your eyes off of your problem and onto Him. Their eyes stopped looking in all the cabinets. They stopped looking in all the jars. They stopped trying to figure out where they were going to get more wine. And all eyes turned to Him. All eyes turned to Him. Look at what He says next in verse 6. He says, standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold about 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, which, listen, that's about between 120 to 180 gallons of wine. That is probably more than enough for a 7-day celebration. He's the God of excess. And listen, we've talked about this a little bit. Let me just add this in here. What if there would have been 7 jars? What if there would have been 8 jars? Would He have filled only 6, or would He have filled what was there? The challenge there is this: He will fill whatever you supply Him. There is always more to receive from Him. Whatever we bring Him is what we will fill. You actually get to choose how much of Him you receive. How many jars do you bring? There's 6 jars there that are empty. And He says, fill the jars with water. When the jars had been filled, He said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So Jesus has the servants fill the jars with water. Let me ask you something this morning. If He can turn the water into wine, do you really think He needs the servants to fill the water jars? If He can turn the water into wine, do you think He really even needs the water in the jars to fill the jars with wine? But He asked the servants to fill the jars. So why does He ask the servants to fill the pots? Why does He ask them to do this thing, even though we all know He didn't need them to do that? Why does He ask them to do that? Because listen, He craves more than to do magic tricks for us. He craves more than just to fix our problems. He actually craves our participation. He actually wants to do this thing with you. He wants to do this thing with you. So He asked the servants to fill the water jars. Let me ask you this. If He can turn 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish into a meal for 5,000 people, does He need the 5 loaves and 2 fish to do it? In an inferior covenant, you remember in the Old Testament, when the when the Israelites were walking through the desert, what fell from heaven? Bread. Right? Why couldn't He just make bread fall from heaven in this moment? He doesn't need the 5 loaves and 2 fish, but He desires the participation of the young boy. He desires to write the young boy into the story. And now, over 2,000 years later, when we sit down and we read our scripture and we read the story of how Jesus multiplies the 5 loaves and 2 fish, we can't read the story without first reading about the little boy. We can't read the story. We can't read the story without realizing that the little boy had a hand in the miracle. That he participated with the Son of God of feeding 5,000 people. And you know what? That little boy got to grow up and tell his kids how he got to participate in the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. He got to share the story with his grandkids, how one day him and his family were listening to this teacher named Jesus, and he had what Jesus is needed to perform the miracle. Listen to this. His legacy got intertwined into Jesus' legacy. He didn't need the servants to fill the water jars. But guess what? The servants got to be a part of the story. They got to be intertwined with the story of Jesus. Jesus doesn't just want to fix your issues. Obviously, there's things that need fixed, right? But he doesn't want to just fix your issues. He wants you to be part of the solution. He wants to intertwine your story with his story, that his legacy becomes your legacy. Why? Because he's not a God who just wants to do magic tricks. He's a God who actually wants to be a part of our lives and us to get to be a part of his. You know, when I'm preparing for a Sunday morning and preparing for a service, that I used to ask that God would just show up and take over the service, and that he would just move and I could even just sit down and not have to do anything. Not because I'm lazy, but because he's just better at it than me, right? But here's what I've learned. And you know what? Sometimes God does that. I've been in services where he's done that. He's just taken over and just nobody can move because his presence is just so strong. And sometimes that happens. But you know what I've learned? I've learned that God actually likes speaking through me. I've learned that God actually likes when Paul's up here singing to the congregation. He actually likes and enjoys moving your heart through his voice. He enjoys moving your heart through Amber's voice, through Carly's, through Kathy's, through the drums up here. That God actually enjoys using people. And I hate that word. He doesn't use people. He does it with us and through us. That he actually enjoys allowing me to pour water into a jar and allowing him then to turn it into wine. This is the God we serve. A God who wants you to be a part of the story, a part of the solution. So we get to turn our eyes to Jesus, but we also get to listen for his instruction. He doesn't just turn the water into wine, but he writes the servants into the story. Whatever situation you may be in this morning, listen, he wants to be there, he wants to walk you through it, but he wants to weave you into the story. My challenge to you is this: don't just wait for him to drop bread from heaven. Listen for the instruction. Listen for the instruction. Listen for what he wants you to do next. And then allow him, once you pour that water into the jar, once you follow that instruction, then you allow him to take what you can't do and turn that water into wine. That's how our God works. You get to be a part of the situation. Listen, it's the circle dance, right? It's perichoresis. It's he is in me and I am in him. So Jesus tells them to fill the jars. Fill the jars. Verse 9, it goes on and it says this: when the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew. And I want to pause there for a second and say this. It's funny because many of you know this is the first public miracle Jesus performs. However, very few people actually know he did it when he did it. Very few people actually know Jesus did it. The master of ceremonies has no clue Jesus turned the water into wine. The guests have no clue that Jesus turned the water into wine. Even the groom, the bridegroom, has no idea that Jesus turned the water into wine. The only people who know that this miracle took place are Mary, the disciples, and the servants. Almost nobody knows what Jesus did, right? But here's what I love about the story. The master of ceremonies calls the bridegroom over and says, you know what he says, why save the best? You save the best wine for now. He says this, but here's what's amazing. The bridegroom made the mistake, but the bridegroom actually received the credit for what Jesus did. And Jesus doesn't correct him. Nobody knows what Jesus did, but the bridegroom actually receives the credit, even though it was the bridegroom's mistake that caused Jesus to have to do the miracle in the first place. Think about that for a second. The bridegroom actually failed to prepare enough wine, but it was the bridegroom who got the credit for what Jesus did. Jesus actually shares the glory of what he did with the one who failed. He shares the glory of what he did with the one who failed. Isn't that the gospel? That we have all fallen short. That we have all sinned against him. That we have all even rebelled and turned our backs against him. We have all failed. And then Jesus comes. He rescues us. And then he says this, you are the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. You have been made holy by the blood of the Lamb. He shares his glory and his righteousness with the ones who failed. There's a story, and I'll end with this parable. There's a story of a man in the ancient Mediterranean history. He lived in the Far East, and he was a master carpenter. Not carpenter, I'm sorry. I'm butchering the story already. Let me start over. There's a man who lived in the ancient Far East who was a master carpet weaver. He was a carpet weaver. He was so good that there was a list of people wanting his carpets that were on these waiting lists for years, and only the most wealthy could afford this man's carpets. And he was getting older in age, and he had a granddaughter, a 6-year-old granddaughter, who loved her grandpa, who adored her grandpa, and wanted to be just like him and do exactly what he did. So one day for her birthday, the master weaver gives his granddaughter a gift. She opens it up, and inside the box are 2 of his favorite weaving needles. And he gifted them to her as a gift. She's so excited. She goes around and shows the whole family this gift that he had given her. And then she comes up to her grandpa and she says, Papa, can we sit down? Can we weave a rug right now? Right? Kids. They want their play with their gift right now. So her grandpa, he's thinking in his head, he's like, I know she's not ready for this. I haven't been able to teach her anything, but you know what? Let's do it. Let's sit down and let's weave a rug together. So the grandpa and the 6-year-old sit down side by side, and they began weaving this rug together. Now, everybody around them, their whole family, their friends, they just assume that this rug is going to probably be a throwaway, right? Because a 6-year-old untrained girl is going to be part of the weaving process. But when the rug is finished and they see the rug for the first time, it is the most masterful, beautiful rug that they've ever made, that the master weaver has ever made. And they're all just stunned. They're amazed that this little girl was able to help him create this beautiful masterpiece. And they begin saying things like, man, she's got the gift. She's a prodigy. She is amazing at this. And they go up to the grandfather. They're like, don't you see? She's a prodigy. She's amazing. She's got your gift. She made this beautiful, masterful rug. And the grandfather, he just kind of sits back and has a gentle smile on his face. He said, actually, she made all kinds of mistakes. In fact, she didn't get one weave right. But I anticipated her mistakes, and I just wove them into the rug. This is how the master weaver works. This is how our Father works. He wants our participation, not because we can do it perfectly, not because we're so good at finding the solution, right? He wants our participation because he wants to sit down like a grandfather with a 6-year-old granddaughter and weave something beautiful together. And that is more valuable to him than sitting by himself and weaving a perfect rug. You are going to probably make a mistake. You're probably going to fail. You're not going to get every stitch right. But listen, keep your eyes on the master weaver. Sit down beside him. Listen to his instructions. Don't be afraid to fail, because even if you do, he'll just weave it into the story. Let's stand together.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more messages like this or information about our church, please visit harmonychurchfamily.org.